Sitting Pretty, The View from My Ordinary Resilient Disabled Body by Rebekah Taussig. Chapter 8, What I Mean When I Talk About Accessibility. The day my friend Jo proposed to my best friend Bertie, I felt a lot of things. I was happy they were happy. I was proud of myself for keeping the proposal a secret. Bertie's mum didn't think I could do it, and I did it, god damn it. And I couldn't wait to help Bertie plan her wedding, although she didn't actually need an ounce of help from me, having the best taste of any real-life human I know. Really, you should have seen her wedding dresses, plural. And yet, among the giddy squeals and over-enthusiastic Pinterest pinning, there was also a pang of sadness. I knew this meant moving out of the house Bertie and I were sharing. 4 years before, I'd left my marriage to build a life on my own. I'd been living solo in a subsidised apartment, buying my own groceries, cleaning up my own messes, and for good and bad, spending so much time alone. I finished my bachelor's and master's degrees and started my PhD program in that apartment. For the first time, I felt capable and in charge of my own story. So when Bertie said she needed a roommate, it felt like a dream coming true. Here I was building a life that I wanted to live in, and it was sturdy enough to expand and explore. I worried about being able to afford paying rent on a place that wasn't set aside for poor, disabled, and/or old folks, and I wasn't quite sure we could even find a place that was accessible. But I took a leap, because it felt like the universe was on my side. We searched for a few tense months. I felt heavy waves of guilt for making Bertie's search so much harder. With any other roommate, she'd have infinitely more options. Seriously, search for any kind of housing on any website, then adjust your settings to include accessible housing, and presto, watch all the options magically disappear. But right before we were about to ditch the plan and set Bertie free to move on to an alternate plan that didn't include her disabled sidekick, we found a little 2-bedroom house on Rainbow Boulevard. The house had a few stairs leading up to the back door and one more big step just inside. Bertie was confident that her engineer dad could build a handy ramp, which later proved to be a much more complicated project than either of us had imagined. I mean, truly, a real-life puzzle. Thank you, Bob. We told the landlord we'd take it. It felt like a lucky find, but I also felt like we'd put in the time. It wasn't until later that I understood just how lucky we'd been. The house was right across the street from a Chinese takeout restaurant and a vet hospital with a vibrant animal mural painted on the side of the building. Bertie found a bright orange vintage sofa on Craigslist, and we set to work filling the place with books and succulents. We threw themed parties and complained about our days over wine and popcorn. We drank lattes and ate noodles on the porch, but never sat on the porch swing because my brother-in-law installed it with the caveat that it couldn't hold the weight of a real human, and we should never ever try to actually swing on it if we valued our lives. I made passive-aggressive comments about the dishes left in the sink, and Bertie started sleeping to the sound of 2 fans to cut out the noise of my cats getting restless at 3 a.m. This was the single adult lady life I'd wanted, but hadn't believed I could live. I saw myself as a pilot who'd guided her plane into the perfect landing. And then Jo proposed, and he and Bertie decided that they didn't want a long engagement, and before I'd even gotten used to seeing that giant ring on her hand, they were looking at houses together. "What should we do with the orange couch?" she asked me. "I don't think we'll take it with us to our house." I concentrated on painting my nails, trying not to cry. "Well, we can't just donate it for some boring person to buy," I said, sounding like a 16-year-old version of myself, appalled at my out-of-touch mother and her inability to understand what was at stake here. The orange couch was sacred. As Bertie dove into wedding planning and picking out rugs for her new house, I dipped my smallest toe into the shallowest pool of home hunting for myself. I was reluctant, a little pouty, and at times just plain sad. Every time I opened my laptop to test the waters, the sparse options dampened my already weak motivation. Again and again, I clamped the laptop closed until suddenly I noticed it was March and Bertie was moving out in May. My moping started to tangle into anxiety. It was time to get serious. I pinpointed my parameters. It had to be affordable on a graduate student budget, but can we even call it a budget when the paychecks are that small? And I had to be able to get in and out of it. If I could move around the space without enormous barriers, that would be cool. Not the most demanding parameters the viewers of HGTV have ever seen, I imagine. I started asking around to my mum and my sisters, my closest friends and their boyfriends, my boyfriend and my dad. Have you heard of any places? Do you know anyone moving? Have you seen any for rent signs? They'd send me Craigslist and apartments.com listings and track down leads from friends of friends. Joe and Bertie spent a whole afternoon driving around town visiting places with me. I had a whole network of loving, smart people on the lookout. Something had to materialise soon. We visited affordable apartments with dirty bathrooms and carpets, one accessible unit per building that might be available in a month or two, and no access parking. There was the unit that was advertised as accessible but actually had street parking on a steep hill and trash bins located across a street with no curb cuts. After a few months of looking, there seemed to be 3 basic categories of housing. 1. Places that were affordable but inaccessible, with parking, laundry units and bathrooms I couldn't access and a nice sprinkling of stairs. 2. Places designated for low-income disabled people with waiting lists in the hundreds. I've had my name on 3 waiting lists for subsidised developments like this in Kansas City, and my name hasn't reached the top of any list in 4 years. One place actually sends me letters each year asking whether I want to keep my name on the list, and I keep saying yes because by the time I actually make it to the top in 10 years, 15, who even knows where I'll be or what I'll need. 3. Places that were brilliantly accessible with sleek floors, wide doorways and elevators, and spectacularly unaffordable. After several months of scouring the internet, my then boyfriend Micah and we hadn't known each other for even a year yet, decided to drive up and down the streets of Kansas City and all its sprawling pockets, looking for any space that might work. Maybe there'd be a magic unicorn building hiding behind a big tree. We hoped. That night we drove around, listening to Vampire Weekend's new album and talking about my upcoming French exam. The hours passed as we made our way across the city, but we hadn't spotted one place to look into. Seemingly out of nowhere, Micah started crying. How is it possible that this city doesn't have any places for you to live? Oh, don't worry, it's okay. We'll find some place, I said instinctually. I rubbed my hand in circles against his back, willing the weight of inaccessibility off his shoulders. But it was a burden I couldn't lift. What Micah had believed to be a series of annoying inconveniences revealed itself as a reality much gnarlier, more powerful and consuming. This wasn't a pesky problem to bat away. It was a problem that defines and dictates. As Bertie started to move her stuff out of the house and into her new home with Joe, I had come to terms with the fact that despite the collaborative efforts of all my people, I still hadn't found a place to live. I secretly wished Micah would ask me to find a house with him. Our combined incomes would allow for more options, but even as I had hoped for it, I felt gross for wanting the progress of our relationship to be determined by my housing situation. So that spring, as I bought a bridesmaid dress for my best friend's wedding, I moved back in with my parents at the age of 29. This was simultaneously a great relief and a profound defeat. On one hand, I was so grateful to have a place to go. This is not the case for many folks, a reality that felt closer but still hardly fathomable to me. Had I not been caught by this net of support, there are other ways this could have gone. Disabled folks are often forced into homelessness, nursing homes, or subsidised housing far away from all that's familiar to them. They can feel like a burden staying with relatives or friends. Sometimes they stay in horrible relationships because they need shelter. I was keenly aware of this. On the other hand, I was embarrassed and deflated to be moving back home at 29. I was burrowing into my childhood bed each night, staring relentlessly into the glow of late-night Craigslist searches. It didn't help that the only bathroom I could access in the house was in my parents' bedroom. I'd get home late in the evenings and sneak into their dark room, listening to my dad's snores and trying not to bang my chair into their antique dresser. Micah would come over to watch Netflix in my childhood bed, and my mum would bring us a bowl of popcorn and a plate of apple slices. Did you forget that I was almost 30? Yeah, me neither. The longer I lived there, the more ashamed I felt. I'd drive home from a day of teaching, pull into my parents' driveway, and feel about as capable of taking control of my own life as a tween. I spend a lot of time at the thrift store down the street, self-soothing by buying the weirdest mugs I can find and cheap gold sequin tops I'll probably only wear once. One day I'm waiting in line for the single accessible dressing room with an older woman who walks with a shuffle. She sits on the lumpy floral couch beside me, staring blankly toward the rack of tangled purses, prepared to wait. This isn't the first time we've sat here together. In fact, I've come to expect the accessible dressing room to be occupied by two friends who can't bear to separate, or someone with a full shopping cart of clothes. 5 inaccessible stalls sit empty beside us, their doors gaping open just in case we hadn't noticed the unused and unusable spaces. It's not always obvious who needs the extra space or a place to sit. The designated accessible signs feature a wheelchair, but that's not the only type of body with an extra layer of need. On this occasion, though, as the older woman and I sit and wait, we feel it. These two shoppers in the dressing room just wanting a bigger room, and they want it all afternoon. We listen to them rummage through clanking hangers, chit-chatting casually as they put on a full-fledged fashion show for each other. They sound a little sleepy, like they've just had a big lunch, and they're ready for a nap. "What do you think of this skirt?" one asks. I see her feet moving below the door. She takes a few slow steps in a circle. I can picture her straining her neck to see the view from behind. The blue accessible symbol blares brightly on the side of the door facing me. "I like it," the guy says, sounding bored. "Are you sure?" More spinning. "Here, try it on with this shirt." She drops one shirt into the pile of clothes I've been watching accumulate on the floor. There's a lot of denim. 20 minutes later, on a ragey whim, I knock on the door. There's no response. I hear his whisper, "Are they knocking on our door?" I chime in, "Hey, yeah, I'm wondering if y'all have an ETA? There are 2 people waiting out here for the accessible dressing room." I keep my voice light and bright, so careful not to put them on the defensive. After a confused pause, the same voice says, "We've got one outfit left to try on." The woman on the couch glances over at me, the first time since we've been sitting side by side, and whispers, "Nice." She gives me a thumbs up and a wink. I feel proud of my small intervention until I realize it doesn't matter. The pair proceeds along with the same rhythm, seemingly unmoved by my friendly prompt. When they exit 5 minutes later, the guy looks over us and past us. No words, no eye contact. He has a few clothes draped over his forearm, and he takes a long, slow step. The woman glances at us and apologizes quickly and quietly. She keeps her eyes to the floor as they walk off. Were they embarrassed? Annoyed? Indifferent? Did they talk about this moment later? Will they even remember it happening by the time they get to their car? Now that I have the space, I rush to try on my handful of dresses. I can picture the woman still sitting on the lumpy floral couch. How long has she waited for this accessible space now? 30 minutes? 35? My anxiety starts to simmer. I think I shouldn't have let her go first. I yank dresses over my head, not taking the time to pull the skirt over my bum before moving on to the next thing. The space is big enough for my whole chair, even with a bench where someone, like a woman waiting outside the door, might sit. This is better than a lot of accessible dressing rooms I've seen, which are often either crowded with storage or just big enough for my chair to fit inside, but not big enough for me to put my feet on the ground to pull up a skirt. There aren't any handrails in this dressing room, though as I put my weight on the hook used for the hangers, trying not to lean too heavily on it. I've broken these kinds of hooks before, using them as a stand-in for handrails when they're designed to hold the weight of only a few sweaters and dresses. It's hard to be careful when I'm rushing, and I feel it strain under my grip. I gasp and let go, falling back in my chair. Time to wrap this up. I fly out of the room shouting, "Your turn!" before I'm through the door. The older woman shuffles in with her tiny bundle of clothes to try on. Nothing about this half hour we've shared together seems to ruffle her too much, as if this is exactly what she expects from the world. My heart surges. You deserve better, I think. You deserve consideration, respect, the space to try on clothes without waiting half an hour for punk-ass shoppers to finally tire themselves out. Your aging body is a wonder, a miracle of defiance and survival. There should be a red carpet unfurling 2 feet in front of your every step. My neck and cheeks are hot. My resentment doubles, enough for her and me. Why is it so much easier to feel indignant for someone else? But if this experience seems routine to her, I have to admit that it is for me too. I'm used to waiting 3 times as long, if not having a place at all. I'm trained to claim as little space as possible, cautiously and apologetically, to avoid irritating people, not just because I hate when anyone is mad at me, but mad people also tend to be less accommodating. It's an overly rehearsed scene with lines I can perform in my sleep. So our experiences overlap, but we seem to receive them differently, and I think I can piece together part of the reason why. As someone who grew up after the passage of the 1990 Americans with Disability Act, I have a fundamentally different perspective than most disabled people born much before me. People like my friend Ruby and her husband Bruce, both wheelchair users and rebellious disability activists and advocates who have been demanding access to participate in their communities since the 1960s and 1970s. Relentless protests, record-breaking sit-ins, and scrappy collaboration like theirs laboured the ADA into existence. I understand that it's because of the ones who came before me that I'm able to occupy as much space as I do. I want to thank them for every ramp, every lift, every accessible dressing room, for my ability to attend school or even become a teacher myself. George H.W. Bush signed the ADA into law in 1990, just a few months after around 1,000 disability activists showed up at the 83 steps in front of our nation's capital, a building that many of them could not enter without elaborate assistance. After hours of speeches and protesting, 60 activists took to the stairs, many of them dragging their bodies up each step, literally demonstrating the spectacle, the social and physical discomfort required to make it inside the political hub of the United States. Did you learn about this part of our history in school? Neither did I. The country hardly noticed the protests or the signing of the act. It was not a sexy news story, unless you were one of the activists who had taken to the Capitol steps in an effort to be seen, acknowledged, maybe even valued, or one of the builders under new, largely misunderstood parameters. People didn't pay much attention. From where I sit in a post-ADA world, it's easy for me to detect the overwhelming disregard, misunderstanding, sometimes disdain, and ubiquitous oblivion surrounding the original vision behind this piece of legislation. My students rarely know what I'm talking about when I mention the ADA, and I've had medical professionals cock their heads in confusion. What is this ADA thing you speak of? It's recorded as law, but it wasn't like the average person went to the voting booth to insist their disabled neighbour to have access to public transportation, and it wasn't promoted as any catchy hashtags. At best, the law quietly insisted that disabled people were humans too. At worst, it embittered the public against those grabby, demanding cripples. Bit by bit, architecture began to change, not necessarily because our mainstream culture wanted to include a group of people they saw as possessing anything unique and valuable, but because the law demanded it. Owners of public buildings were required to make accommodations that many viewed as frivolous, inconvenient, and much too expensive for the payoff. In fact, Americans understood and valued the ADA so little that about 25 years after it was signed into law, representatives from Texas and California dreamed up H.R. 620, the ADA Education and Reform Act of 2017, which sought to dismantle the bit of relief that the ADA offers by placing even more burden on disabled people to defend themselves and demand their right to access. In February 2018, the bill passed in the House with 225 yeas and 192 nays. It wasn't brought to a vote in the Senate, largely due to the efforts of Tammy Duckworth, a disabled senator from Illinois, who led a Democratic pledge to block the legislation. The bill died before going to a vote thanks to one disabled woman speaking up for the community that is still so often silenced. I wonder when or if access will become a concern in the forefront of everyone's minds, not just the ones who don't have it. The revisions being made or requested for disabled bodies are often seen as extra, but this perspective holds up only because ableism is built on self-delusion. We tell ourselves the story that accessibility is a concern for only the disabled body, conveniently ignoring every form of access that has been carefully, painstakingly breathed into existence to make life easier for non-disabled bodies. Let's take a giant step back and look at this together, like aliens watching from another planet. Someone somewhere at some point in time invented stairs, right? And since then, we've continued to build stairs because they're easier for bipeds than scaling walls or climbing rope ladders. We have cars and bikes because we want to travel faster and further than our limited bodies can manage on their own. Parking lots and roads were made because people wanted easier pathways for driving their vehicles. Without intervention on behalf of the human body, we'd all be sleeping on the grass, drinking lake water from our cupped hands, living every day of sweltering summer heat and frigid winter snows in all our radiant nakedness. Mattresses, cups, and clothes exist because the human body has limits and tools making surviving this planet a little bit easier. Literally everything that's been built, every signpost and path out in nature, every building and bus in our cities, every doorknob and chair in your house was made to accommodate somebody. We stop refining or expanding our accommodations only when we're satisfied that those we want at the party can get there. But our accommodations go only so far, because for a good long while, we've cared to include only a specific kind of body, mind, in our communities. Conversations about access for disabled folks didn't even start in the United States until disabled World War II vets demanded job training and rehabilitation after their return. It wasn't until 1973, after activists occupied a San Francisco federal building for 28 days, that Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act became the first piece of legislation to say, yes, you too. We think disabled folks deserve to exist here too. Accommodations for disabled people aren't special, at least not any more special than the world of accommodations already surrounding us. It's just that typically, those who already have access haven't had to think about who is still waiting to be included. And yet, when we consider disabled bodies as a vital part of the larger group, all of us benefit. When curb cuts were originally designed, the idea was to create accommodations for wheelchair users. Prompted by the smallest whiff of creative innovation, curb cuts were imagined into being as alternate options for interacting with our physical spaces, and suddenly wheelchair users were granted access to more of their own neighbourhoods and public spaces. But something else happened too. Parents pushing strollers found trips around the block a bit easier, and so did people on bikes and scooters, people rolling luggage, vendors with food carts, people in pain who needed to take smaller, more gradual steps. Closed captioning provides those with hearing impairments a way to access the stories and news delivered through their screens, but it also allows everyone the chance to connect with videos, even when they need to turn the sound off on their device or can't understand a mumbler. The medical model of disability, the default setting that sees individual broken bodies in need of individual solutions, misses so many opportunities to imagine a more flexible, accessible, inclusive, inviting world for all of us. What innovations might be made to medicine if disabled bodies were seen as conduits for innovation? What possibilities for play are we missing on our playgrounds? What practices might we adopt in our educational systems to facilitate more flexible, more meaningful learning for more students? What ways of being in the world might surface if we were able to lift the stigma clinging so tightly to the disabled body? What would happen if we decided disabled bodies were worth including? When I say included, I don't mean just the dressing room designated as the accessible space or the handful of first-floor apartments across an entire city designed as the accessible units. Access is more than the moment one disabled body bumps into one accommodating object. Access is a way of life, a relationship between you and the world around you. It's a posture, a belief that your role in your community, about the value of your presence. There's a fundamental difference between the experience of the person who wakes up taking for granted that they will, of course, have access, and the one who wakes up and wonders whether they'll have access or how they'll find or fight for their access, what they'll do when they don't have access. How do I make this real? Even though I know in my head that I have every right to be here, I've also been shaped from the ground up by a lifetime of inaccessibility, and because of this, there's still so much I don't know about myself. For instance, I don't know if I'm a bar person. It's hard to tell. When I roll into a bar, the bartender doesn't see me, or maybe just the very top of my head if they're looking for it. If I'm able to shout loud enough, wave my arms wildly enough to be seen and heard to order a drink, I turn round to a room full of people standing, talking a good 2 or 3 feet above my head. When I speak, they don't hear me. So I shout over the talking and the music, and they lean down, angling their ears to my mouth. They nod and pretend they got all of that. I don't know if I like trying new things. I mean, every part of me wants to say, I do, I love new things, let's try more. But then a friend invites me to her birthday party at a new pizza joint, and I spend 2 hours Google Earthing the spot, squinting my eyes across grainy images, scouring the restaurant's crappy website for info on parking to access whether or not I'll be able to get in the restaurant. And when I can't figure it out and my breathing gets short, I send a quick text to say, I'm not feeling well. So sorry, I won't be able to make it. Then I spend the rest of the night hitting next episode on Criminal Minds and listening to my brain repeat, what is wrong with you? I don't know if I care enough about my students. Last spring, I got invite after invite to attend my seniors' graduation parties. My heart sang, yes, let's celebrate. Then I starred all of the invites in my email and waited weeks to respond. In that time, my brain flipped through imaginary visions of each venue and home, all of the emails and conversations I'd have to plan, how I'd get through front doors or onto patios. I thought about dads lifting me and my chair up flights of stairs, or aunts moving ends tables or stacks of books or houseplants out of my way. All of the quick damage control my body would inspire. My anxiety mounted. I sent out apology emails to each one saying I was so sorry, I wouldn't be able to make it, never giving the real reason why. I'm not sure how much of my absence was noticed, but I feel weak and small, frustrated and disappointed. I don't know if I fit in. I feel like an outsider with most people. How much is based on the fact that as we navigate an environment together, the restaurant or park or bumpy sidewalk, a good quarter of my brain power is put into carrying that cup of coffee without spilling it or keeping my eye on the accessible route. How much of it comes back to the fact that I'm always taking a different path to get to meetings and gatherings. I'm on the elevator while everyone else climbs the stairs. I'm flying down the ramp while others take the direct route. I'm driving to the conference in my accessible car while they take the train together. Some of this could be remedied if I'd just say, hey, someone ride in my car. And sometimes folks take the elevator with me, but I'm already feeling like the weirdo. Like a middle schooler who prefers to remain under the radar. I'll just stay invisible over here, thanks. I don't always have it in me to ask people to join me on my roundabout path. These moments add up so rapidly and consistently that I barely notice the added weight. When I take a beat and look around, I don't know where my personal insecurities end and the ableism picks up. Who would I even be if my body were allowed seamless access to my city, my community, my friends' houses? I mean, really, what would happen if I stumbled onto some alternate universe made perfectly accessible to me? It's hard to imagine such an unfamiliar flow of confidence, self-assuredness, and ease. The summer I moved back in with my parents drifted into fall. And finally, on my desperate late-night searches for a place to live, brought up a little house with manageable rent and only a few front steps. I thought, If I can find a way up that curb and we build a ramp, maybe this could work. I arrange a visit with the landlord. Micah bumped me up the front steps and through one of the 2 front doors. I took one look around and my heart swooned. Home! The landlord told me the house was built in 1895. All of the doorknobs were wobbly and cracks were creeping up the walls and across the ceiling. It had a farmhouse kitchen sink, a freestanding clawfoot tub, and plenty of unexpected quirks like that extra front door and ancient knobs on the vents and locks. I eyed the bathroom, and although I couldn't fit my chair through the door, the landlord said he'd throw up a few handrails. I could picture myself sitting on the edge of the tub while I brushed my teeth at the sink. The real miracle was the washer and dryer located on the main level. In my previous house, as most old houses, the laundry unit was located in the basement, so I'd been taking giant piles of dirty clothes over to my parents' house every other week for ages. A washer and dryer I could access in my own home. It was a palace. A few weeks later, I moved in and set to work making it my own. Based on the design and overwhelming lack of flair breathed into the vast majority of tools and spaces deemed accessible, I imagine it's assumed that disabled folks don't really have taste. If you need access, surely the desire for style has been cancelled out. Accessibility must necessarily be the sole, all-consuming number one priority, erasing any other possible preference or desire. Beggars can't be choosers, and all that. You'll take the glaring metal bars, cement walls, and brown Velcro, and you'll be grateful. Of course, functionality is important. You might even say vital. I can't live somewhere that I can't get into. But I'm also a person with very specific preferences about floors and lighting, wall colour and door frames in my home. I don't want just a shelter I can enter and survive in. I want a space that feels like home. Don't you? Micah and I bought 3 flimsy laminated bookshelves from the thrift store and spray painted each piece on the front porch in the middle of the night. We gathered a bunch of old magazines, cut out piles of pictures, and pasted them into pots and into collages for the walls. I placed my southwestern cactus lamp next to the giant Greek mythology painting with the gold frame because I liked the way the colours meshed. Since I can't stand up for a shower very well, I reconfigured the space, hanging plants with hearty green leaves and winding vines along the shower curtain rod above the tub. Even today, I stare up at the vines curling above me during a soak and feel like I'm in a jungle. Home! The place where I feel inspired, free to create and dance and make messy and simply be. The place that swaddles me in stories and vibrant life. Before I get carried away and you start believing in happily ever after, it's important that we look at this house in its entirety. I love my cracking, wobbly home, but it's not a perfect picture of access. I park my car on the street, so I have to pop my wheelchair up on the curb, and I don't make it every time. Then I push myself up the steep ramp to my front door, which can be slow and grueling. Things fall off my lap, and it really sucks when it's raining. I can't fit my wheelchair in the bathroom, and my exquisite freestanding tub is not an ideal setup for an easy transfer. Folding is pretty routine. Sometimes after spilling my groceries trying to get up the ramp or slipping in the bathroom, I'll start another Craigslist search. I've reached my limit, I'll think, but quickly the discouraging search to find new accessible home I love and can afford brings back the warm fuzzies of where I am. For now, I'm willing to pay the toll of the curb to feel cozy and inspired in my home. This is messy, works for now, finding my own weird way access, while not throwing aesthetics out the window. This is the balance I'm striking for now. And for all of the intricacies, roadblocks, and trade-offs embedded in my own story, I see a library full of other stories, other ways folks with disabilities have managed to navigate the space they occupy. I don't know how many have landed in nursing homes. Who has died before their name has made it to the top of one of those waiting lists? Who is going into debt, feeling ostracized, accumulating guilt for leaning on others? I don't know what badass accommodations people have built for themselves, what beautiful spaces have been dreamed into existence for disabled bodies and minds. I don't know all these stories, but I know each of them is full and complicated and deeply personal. I understand that my city isn't actively trying to send me the message that I'm unwanted. My community isn't actively trying to make me move back in with my parents. The businesses in this area aren't forbidding me from spending my money there. That can't be said for a lot of groups of people throughout history and even today. Instead, the message I hear the most is something more like, "We're just not thinking about you at all." A sentiment that intends no harm, even as it dismisses an entire population. After waiting so long for the accessible dressing room, I feel empowered to use my voice. As I place my items on the checkout counter, I smile at the clerk and ask to speak with a manager. I am not a threat. I just want to have a friendly chat, my chirpy voice tells her, in a frantic attempt to avoid slipping into the weather-worn role of angry cripple versus defensive store manager. I don't know what I'm hoping for, that they'll put a lock on the door so you have to get a sales associate to let you in, that they post an extra threatening sign below the already existing accessible symbol. I just want to run something by you so you and your staff can be aware, I say, smile fixed, treading so lightly. I explain the accessible dressing room is often being used for extra long fashion shows with pals. She is apologetic, indignant even. That shouldn't happen, she says firmly. She seems to really feel it. I'm relieved. She's heard me, I think. Next time you're in the store, she says, let us know and we'll make sure that room is available for you. Wait, what? My hands tingle. The sturdy, clear communication I thought we were having completely dissolves. This is the solution? I imagine trying to flag down a staff member every time I visit the store, the awkwardness of getting their attention while a line of customers waits, trying to explain the situation from the ground up to a new person each time, shopping with the pressure of knowing that they're keeping a dressing room open just for me. It reminds me of the bakery in Westport with a lift outside the building that can be operated only with a key they keep inside. Just call us when you're waiting outside. We'll send someone out to get you. On the Crepe restaurant in Westside, after pushing yourself up the ramp attached to the side of the building, you find a locked door with a keypad. Just send a friend to open it from the inside, they say. And what if I'm alone? This moment in the thrift store waiting for the accessible dressing room is connected to 1,000 other moments that, altogether, weighs approximately 1,000 pounds. But to the manager, this is a rare occasion, an unexpected hiccup in her week. Some disabled woman asking for a special favour each time she visits the store. It requires a small adjustment, an easy accommodation, problem solved. But to me, I imagine the aging woman who waited for the accessible room with me, this is an everyday, everywhere experience. The battle that follows the previous battle and precedes the next one in our ongoing attempt to occupy space in the world. This isn't just about me, I tell the store manager. This happens to everyone who comes in your store and needs that dressing room. She keeps nodding emphatically, sweetly even. The conversation fizzles into both of us repeating ourselves. She thinks she has heard me. I leave the store and get in my car, deflated. She didn't hear me at all. In that moment, talking with the thrift store manager, it felt clearer than ever why stores are built the way we are. Why non-disabled people perpetually occupy the few spaces designated for disabled bodies, why an entire city hadn't thought to build spaces for disabled folks to live in, why it's so hard to achieve genuine change. The vast majority of non-disabled people don't see, and certainly don't feel, the experience of disabled folks. There are others who recognise the textures of inaccessibility, fat and queer folks, so many ageing bodies, people of colour and those encountering language barriers. Anyone who knows poverty, all have an extra set of fears, costs and concerns. But so many others can step into a new restaurant or bar without worrying whether there will be a spot where they can pee. And when they pop into the public restroom, they're presented with 5 stalls made with their bodies in mind. They can click accept on an Evite without researching venues and texting the host to come up with an elaborate game plan for getting in the door. They can get on and off public transport, visit a new city, travel from here to there without researching accessibility in advance. Do you know how many destinations provide any information about accessibility at all? Have fun on Google with this one. They can book a hotel room without worrying whether they'll really be able to use the shower or sink once they get there. They have access to every kind of seating in the theatre, stadium, coffee shop, bar. They can try on clothes in pretty much every kind of dressing room ever made. When it's time to move, they have more than literally one option. How can anyone feel the rejection, reach, and urgency of inaccessibility if the entire world has been built with them in mind? Because inaccessibility over time equals what exactly? It's more than a string of inconveniences. It's more powerful than a missing ramp here and an elevator there. Although, good Lord, I am grateful for every ramp and elevator I see, always. My experience of inaccessibility is cumulative. It's more than a line of targets to knock down. It's a way of being in the world, or just outside of the world. It's a blaring message on a loudspeaker to tune out, an ideology to survive. Some days I feel too vulnerable to leave my house, too fed up to subject myself to the gamble of strangers interacting with me, too tired to fight to occupy a corner of space. Inaccessibility over time tells me that I do not matter, I am not wanted, do not belong. This land wasn't made for me, so I stay in, keep to myself, avoid, cancel plans, carry anxiety in each fold and bend of my body, feel very alone and trapped and helpless. I also cope. I write, laugh, develop deep friendships with a safe few, find the movie theatres and coffee shops I can access and go to them 100 times in a row. And sometimes I allow myself to be lifted up and down a flight of stairs. There are days I talk over the loudspeaker that says I'm not welcome, when I refuse to be invisible and silent. Sometimes I even forget how hard this is. All of this is true at the same time. Whenever I share a story about a shop that has a dumpster in an accessible parking spot or a restaurant that keeps its accessible entrance locked, people are quick to indignation, channeling all of their rage at this one business, listing all sorts of things I should do, or they would do, to demand accessibility. You should call this number. I would tell off that person. Some days I have a bit of that fight in me, especially when I can see the big picture, that this isn't just about me. Those days are the days I can talk to the manager about the problems I see with the thrift store's accessible dressing room. But the rest of the time, it feels like getting out a toothbrush to clean a filthy house when I'm still trying to find a way to breathe in these rooms full of toxic fumes. Even so, I choose to have faith that we are getting there, making our own weird way to an accessible future, a space that supports all of us. An accessible future is shaped by the fundamental understanding that we all have bodies, that these bodies are different from one another, that each is worthy of profound admiration, care, and respect. The aging body, the female body, the body in pain, the injured or sick body, the fat or short or asymmetric body, the radically stigmatized body, the body that needs to use the bathroom, the blind, deaf, paralyzed, tired, non-binary, hungry, bleeding, transitioning, seizing body. Every single one. In this future, people won't be punished, shamed, isolated, excluded, cast to the fringes, or told to go around the back or to find another toilet because of that body. Bodies, in all of their variant forms, will be considered, allowed, and welcomed. Our vast differences will be thought of as we design our structures, our buildings, our healthcare, our transportation, our mobility aids, our roads, our governments, our clothing, our classrooms, our spaces of work and play, our notions of love and romance, parenthood and friendships. In this future, we will not be encouraged to silence our bodies. Instead of rejecting and abusing our bodies to fit into the boxes, our boxes will be bigger and malleable. This future doesn't only recognize but honors the fact that our bodies grow and tire, rebel and tremble, and fight and change and scar and defy categorization. This future won't appear out of thin air. We have to create it little by little as we practice listening to, caring for, and respecting all of our bodies. Please, let's create this world for each other.